They said the execution would begin at sunset. The square was already filling with the sound of feet and whispers, with people who had come not for justice, but for blood. Eddard Stark knelt, wrists bound, the weight of treason heavy on his shoulders, though the truth was another kind of burden altogether. He had confessed, lied to save his daughters, to end the pain. But just as Ser Ilyn raised the great sword ice above his head, a shrill cry pierced the air. A raven, black as night, flew low over the crowd, and a rider stormed into the square behind it, yelling for the headsman to stop. It was Lord Varys, his voice, usually soft and sly, now cracked with urgency. By order of the Queen Regent, this execution is stayed. Lord Stark is to be taken into custody and escorted to the Black Cells, alive. The sword froze mid-air. The crowd groaned in confusion. A few even shouted for the execution to continue. Joffrey stood, face twitching, with fury, but Cersei stepped forward, whispering something into his ear that only he could hear. The boy king scowled, but finally waved his hand with a scornful flick. The guards pulled Ned roughly to his feet and dragged him away. No one knew that moment would shape the future of the Seven Kingdoms. Down in the damp darkness of the dungeons, Ned sat with swollen wrists and a broken pride. He didn't know what Cersei wanted. Mercy wasn't in her nature, but he knew she wasn't done using him. Maybe he was still a pawn in her game. Maybe she needed leverage, or maybe, just maybe, she was afraid. A week passed. Then came Varys again, gliding like a shadow into Ned's cell. "The Queen wishes to make you an offer." Ned didn't lift his eyes. "She wants another lie." "No," Varys said, folding his hands. "She wants a quiet war. You are to take the Black." Ned flinched. "The Wall. She will say you were sent there in exile, your name disgraced, but your life spared. Your daughters will stay, here, as wards." "No," Ned said, his voice low and cold. "That's not an offer, that's a threat." "It's survival," Varys replied, "and perhaps a second chance." That night, Ned Stark stared at the damp ceiling, torn by the weight of duty and the hope of vengeance. He thought of Jon, of Robb, of Winterfell buried in snow. He thought of the lies he'd been forced to tell, of the secrets buried with his brother and sister. And in that moment, he didn't see himself as a prisoner. He saw himself as a man who had been given a second breath. Varys returned the next day with one more gift, a message smuggled from the north. It bore the direwolf seal. "Father, word has reached us. If you live, we march. Tell us when." Ned's hand trembled as he read his son's words. Robb was gathering men. The North hadn't forgotten, and neither had Ned Stark. This wasn't mercy. This was war, disguised in a whisper, and this time he would not kneel. The cold bit deeper than the stone beneath his feet as Ned stepped out of the cart near the docks. He was disguised in black, head lowered, flanked by two silent guards. As the ship to Eastwatch by the Sea waited in the fog, Cersei hadn't wasted time. Less attention, less chance for rebellion. He didn't speak, neither did the gold cloaks. But beneath the hood, Ned's eyes stayed sharp. Not at the sea, at the city. He was leaving King's Landing alive. And that was something no one, not even he, expected. Somewhere behind those walls, Sansa remained trapped in a court full of vipers. Arya was still missing, and all he could do now was keep breathing and wait for the right moment. The Wall, they believed, was exile, irrelevant. The Night's Watch was full of thieves, rapists, and dishonored men. But what they didn't know was that the cold taught clarity, that the Wall had eyes, ears, and the sharp memory of old men who remembered true oaths. It was Jon who met him at Castle Black. The moment their eyes met, no words passed between them. Not yet. Jon had changed. His shoulders were broader. There was an edge to him, but it was in his eyes that Ned saw something else. The same fire that once lived in his own. They embraced like men, holding back years. "You're alive," Jon whispered. "For now," Ned answered. The Watch didn't question his arrival, though the tales spread faster than wildfire. A dead man returned. The man who faced death by the crown, now clothed in black. Even Alistair Thorne kept his tongue behind gritted teeth. Some saw it as a punishment, others a miracle. But Ned didn't come to serve. He came to plan. He spoke with Maester Aemon by candlelight, choosing his words carefully. He asked about ravens, the reach of messages, and soon a pattern formed. Quiet missives sent north, silent messages reaching Bear Island, the Dreadfort, the Glovers, each bearing no more than 4 words: "The wolf still lives." Back in King's Landing, the Queen's smile began to tighten. Rumors trickled in like slow poison. Northern lords grew restless. Robb Stark had not disbanded his army. The Vale whispered of betrayal, and Tyrion, too clever by half, warned his sister of a truth she refused to hear. "You should have." "Let him die," he said over wine. "Starks have long memories, and wolves do not forgive." But it wasn't until the first raven arrived at River Run that the game truly began to shift. Catelyn Stark read the letter with trembling hands. Her husband was alive. For days she'd wept, blamed herself, cursed the gods for taking him. Now, the flood of vengeance returned with a sharpened edge. She showed the message to Robb, who stared at the parchment like it was both a blessing and a curse. "He's alive," Robb said, voice flat. "Then the war isn't over." "No," she whispered, "it hasn't even begun." In Winterfell, Bran saw it in a dream. A great shadow of a man standing tall beyond the wall, cloaked in black, but eyes burning with fire. The weirwood trees whispered his name, and in the shadows of Castle Black, Ned Stark knelt in the snow beneath the heart tree, swearing a second oath, not to the crown, not to the Night's Watch, but to the memory of his father and the vengeance owed to his blood. "I kept the realm's secrets," he said. "Now let them fear the truth. Because truth had power, and it was coming for them all." Snow fell like ash over Castle Black, silent and steady, masking the wind's fury. Ned Stark stood atop the wall, staring northward, but his mind drifted south to red keeps and golden lions, to his daughter imprisoned in silk and chains, to a throne won by fire and kept by lies. He had seen war, but the war he was about to begin would not be fought in open fields. It would slither through corridors, crack through old alliances, and bleed from the shadows. Cersei believed she had rid herself of him. Instead, she had released the one man who knew too much, and who had nothing left to lose. In the weeks that followed, the wall became more than exile. It became a forge. Jon sat with him by the fire one night, a bottle of sour wine between them, their faces drawn. In flickering orange, "You're not just here to take the black," Jon said. "You're building something." "I was broken," Ned admitted, voice low, "but they made a mistake leaving me alive. Now I mean to return the favor." Jon leaned in. "Then tell me the truth." Ned's eyes didn't flinch. "About you." Jon swallowed hard. "It wasn't the time," Ned said. "It still isn't." Jon's jaw clenched, frustration blooming in his silence. But soon, and with that, Ned gave him the same thing he gave Robb. Loyalty built not on blood alone, but on a promise of something more. The messages continued, every raven sent with care, with code known only to the old bannermen. The north began to stir. At Bear Island, Lady Mage Mormont trained her daughters harder than ever. At Carhold, Karstark men sharpened blades under moonlight. Even the Boltons, ever snakes, felt the tremors. But they waited, watching which way the wind would turn. Down in the south, the Lannisters celebrated too early. Tommen was born, and Cersei believed she had bought herself time. With Robert dead and Renly playing politics, she thought the Iron Throne had been secured through blood and fear. But Tyrion wasn't so easily fooled. He watched her with narrowed eyes and listened in shadows. He noticed the increased security around the Red Keep. He saw how Varys vanished for hours, and he knew in his bones that Ned Stark had not returned to be silent. One night Tyrion cornered the spider himself. "You've been very busy," he said, voice casual, swirling his cup of arbor gold, writing little notes to cold places. Varys didn't smile. "The realm must be stable." "You call this stable? I call it necessary." Tyrion drank. "What's in it for you?" Varys looked up. Survival. That was all. In Riverrun, Robb Stark assembled his lords again. Grey Wind paced restlessly outside the hall as Robb stood before bannermen with fire in his voice. "My father lives. The North remembers. We do not forget executions stayed by politics, nor children held hostage as coin." He didn't speak like a boy anymore. The lords rose one by one, pledging swords not just for honor, but for vengeance. For the first time since Robert's rebellion, the Riverlands and the North were waking together, yet none of them knew the storm was moving faster than any raven could fly. That night, on the wall, Ned walked beyond the gates with Jon and Ghost at his side into the woods cloaked in moonlight. They followed the old path, one only the wildlings knew. Ned had asked for one thing from the watch, a quiet exit. In return, he left behind his cloak. By morning, Castle Black found nothing but a folded black garment on the bench and a blank page in the ledgers. Lord Stark had vanished. But far beyond, in the dark, snow-covered trees, men loyal to the North waited with fresh horses. Jon stood in silence as Ned mounted one. "You're leaving?" he asked. "I must return to the living," Ned said, his voice like ice cracking. "To ghosts that wear crowns." And with that, Ned Stark rode south, not to beg for justice, but to take it. The North had begun to whisper louder now. Farmers who once kept their heads down in fear of Lannister gold cloaks now spoke the name Stark in the open. Small folk, who remembered the wolf banners raised in Robert's rebellion, started keeping blades hidden beneath haystacks and hearthstones, because news had a way of traveling, even if wrapped in silence. Ned Stark was alive. Some doubted it, called it a ghost tale, but others believed. And belief is a dangerous thing when it spreads among people who have nothing left to lose. At Winterfell, Maester Luwin received the first raven confirming it. A seal broken, the note unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Ned's. He dropped the cup in his hand. Bran sat across from him in the solar, watching silently. He hadn't spoken much since the fall, but he saw more now, felt more. "He's coming home," Bran said, without being told. "Maybe not yet," Luwin replied, voice shaking, "but yes, he's alive." Meanwhile, Robb's army had taken up camp on the outskirts of Harrenhal. Smoke still trailed from the ruined towers where Lannisters once held court. The castle's burned bones felt like an omen. Robb stood atop the battlements, looking at the road leading south. He didn't want a crown anymore. He wanted vengeance. Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, approached beside him. "We've scattered the Lannister scouts, but we'll need more than men. The Vale sits idle." Robb exhaled through his nose. They won't stay idle long. He had sent ravens to Lysa Arryn, 3 of them, no reply, but that wasn't the plan. The real message had been smuggled in with the 4th, a different letter entirely, not written by Robb, written by Ned. And Lysa Arryn, in her madness and paranoia, still feared only one thing more than losing power: truth. The kind only. Ned Stark knew it wouldn't be long now. Farther south, in the damp, candlelit corridors of King's Landing, Cersei Lannister grew uneasy. Joffrey was becoming more unstable each day, quick to punish, quick to kill, but slower to listen. She had spies everywhere. Yet none had reported seeing Eddard Stark die, only that he was taken. She cornered Varys one evening, dragging him into her chamber, her voice low and venomous. "Where is he?" "Who, your grace?" "Don't play games with me. Ned Stark. You said he'd be shipped to the wall." "He was," Varys said smoothly, "until he vanished beyond it. As if he never meant to serve at all." Cersei's face tightened. "You said he was broken." "I said he was breathing." And that was the truth of it. Cersei slammed the door behind her, but inside her mind the pieces began to fall. If Ned lived, he could speak. About her children, about Jaime, about Jon Arryn. If he found proof, if he reached the right ears, her rule would end in fire. She summoned Ser Meryn. "Double the guards on Sansa. If he comes for her, I want to know the moment she blinks wrong." But it was already too late. Because in the Riverlands, the wolf pack had begun to move. Robb's bannermen fanned out, meeting secret allies, Tully's scouts, Stark loyalists in exile, and men who'd bled for Ned in Robert's rebellion. They called themselves the Ashen Brotherhood, named for the ash that had fallen the day Ned Stark's execution was meant to take place. And in the black of night, riding cloaked through the woods under a moonless sky, Ned met them himself. They gathered around him like ghosts from a forgotten war. Glover men, Mormont riders, even some broken Freys, disgusted with Walder's betrayal. "You shouldn't have returned," said Lord Wyman Manderley, voice heavy with age and spite. "But I'm damned glad you did." Ned looked around at their weathered faces. "I won't ask you to fight for a throne or a banner," he said. "I ask you to fight for the truth, for your sons who died believing in justice, for the girls held hostage in Silk, for the North, and for the fire they lit beneath it." They drew their swords in silence. No cheers, no songs, only steel, because the wolves were not coming. They were already here. The first man to die was a Lannister courier. Throat cut, his message stolen, his body left in a muddy stream. It happened at dusk on the Gold Road, 3 leagues from Harrenhal. A warning. Then came the second, a captain of the City Watch, found hanging from a tree with a wolf claw carved into his chest. The third was a bannerman of House Payne. And, by the time the fourth fell, a knight burned alive in his tent outside Rosby, the Lannisters knew the Ashen Brotherhood wasn't a rumor. It was war. And Ned Stark had returned to finish what the rebellion had failed to do. Back in King's Landing, chaos brewed like spoiled wine. Joffrey lashed out at his court, demanding the heads of the Brotherhood. He beheaded 3 kitchen boys accused of suspicious glances and had a stablemaster flayed for not saddling his horse quickly enough. Cersei, drunk more often than sober, barked at every meeting with the small council. They were losing control. Sansa, locked in her chambers, most days heard the panic in the Red Keep, guards doubling, ravens flying out like frightened birds. But it wasn't until Ser Dontos, a fool in name only, slipped her a note beneath her dinner plate that she began to understand. "Your father rides. The wolf breathes." She clutched the note until her knuckles bled. Far away, Robb received word that Tywin Lannister had begun moving men westward, not toward Winterfell, but south, toward the Reach. His plan was clear: to threaten House Tyrell into compliance and cut off any southern alliances Ned Stark might hope to forge. But Robb wasn't a boy anymore. And this wasn't chess. It was blood. He sent Roose Bolton and the Dreadfort riders east under darkness, while he and the Blackfish moved west with all the fury of the north at their backs. He would not play defense. He would strike. And the first blow came near Ashford, where the Lannister supply line vanished overnight, raided by cloaked riders who left only flames and dead horses behind. In the Vale, Lysa Arryn finally broke her silence. It wasn't loyalty that moved her, but fear. Fear that if Ned Stark truly lived, he might speak of her secrets, of Jon Arryn's final moments, of the letter she'd forged, of the spiders. Whispers. She dispatched a raven under her own seal to King's Landing, declaring neutrality, but by then it was meaningless. Ned had already moved again. This time, he was in the Stormlands, meeting with remnants of House Baratheon's loyalists, men who had refused to bend the knee to Joffrey and fled the capital in shame. Men like Sir Courtenay Penrose, like old bannermen of Stannis and Renly, who didn't trust each other, but trusted the Stark name. They met in a forgotten keep, just a circle of men with rusted swords and bleeding hearts. "I won't ask you to fight for a king," Ned told them, his face older, carved with sorrow. "But I will ask you to fight for your honor, because it's all we have left." And slowly they began to nod. Then, just as the fires died and they prepared to ride again, came a blow Ned had not foreseen. The letter arrived on a raven with no crest, its ink smudged, the writing small and hurried. A man claiming the name Stark was found at the wall, hanged. Your cloak, your blade, Jon Snow. Ned staggered back, the paper nearly dropping from his hands. "No," he whispered, but the room was already silent. Roose Bolton read the note and remained quiet, though his eyes glinted with something too cold to name. "I left him behind," Ned said hoarsely. "I left him." "No body was seen," one of the Mormont men said quickly. "Could be a trick." But it didn't matter. Ned had been careful, quiet, steady, but now the enemy had sent a message, not with words, but with blood. They knew he was moving, and they weren't just hunting him. They were hunting anyone with his name. Ned mounted his horse that night, eyes rimmed red, voice tighter than steel. "We ride to Moat Cailin. The north is the only place left that's still ours." "And what then?" asked Sir Courtenay. Ned didn't blink. "Then we burn south." The air grew colder as they approached Moat Cailin, a bitter, bone-deep chill that wasn't from the weather. It was the weight of history pressing on every stone. The ruins sat like a scar across the neck, ancient and rotted, but still strong, enough to choke the road into the north. And for Ned Stark, it was home soil again, the first time in months. He stood atop the crumbled battlements, staring at the swamplands ahead. Ravens flew toward him daily now, bringing good news and bad, mostly bad. Roose Bolton's men had taken one Lannister camp, but lost half their number to poisoned wells. Cailin had vanished from Riverrun, last seen travelling east with a guard of 5. And no word had come of Arya. But even worse than all that was the silence from Jon. Ned had sent 4 ravens north to Castle Black. All returned unanswered. He tried not to imagine his son strung up by gold-cloaked hands, or worse, buried, nameless in snow. He didn't speak of it, not yet. Robb arrived a week later, father and son embraced in the courtyard, their armor clinking, both too changed to say what they truly felt. Robb's face was leaner now, harder. There was a scar beneath his left eye, and his voice no longer cracked when he gave orders. "You should have told me," he said. "I didn't know if I'd survived the first month," Ned answered. "And I didn't want to give you false hope." Robb nodded once. "We're past hope now." The camps grew as bannermen poured in, reed men from the swamps, Bear Island fighters in furs, even a few knights from House Serwyn, long silent. The north had heard the call, but it wasn't banners that moved them. It was fury, the kind that only comes when someone survives their own execution. They weren't marching for a crown, they were marching to bury one. Inside the keep, Ned held council with Robb, the Blackfish, and Roose Bolton. The mood was tense. Every move forward risked too much. The Vale sat idle. The Freys still hadn't chosen a side, and the Lannisters were regrouping at King's Landing. Roose Bolton leaned in with that chilling calm of his. "A direct assault on the capital will lose us the war, you know that." Ned said nothing. Robb, fists clenched on the table, looked to his father. "Then what do we do? Wait, let them take Winterfell next?" Ned stood slowly. "We divide." That silenced the room. "I'll ride east with the Ashen Brotherhood," he said. "Small strikes, quiet ones. We hit supply lines, burn grain stores, and bleed them from within. You take the bulk of our strength and move west. Make them believe you're driving for Casterly Rock. split their attention. Confuse them. Rose spoke first. And if they realize what you're doing, then I die in a ditch outside the capital, Ned said. But the North will still rise. Robb hesitated, but nodded. There was no other way. That night, as the war lines were drawn, a raven finally arrived. It bore the black wax seal of the Night's Watch. Ned cracked it open with trembling fingers. The message was brief. Just 5 words. Your son lives. Not safe. His hand tightened. He closed his eyes. It was enough. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Ned rode out from Moat Cailin with 50 men. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough to kill quietly. They rode east beneath overcast skies, passing ghost towns and butchered fields, through lands burned by Lannisters months earlier. But someone followed. He noticed it first near the ruins of an old inn, shadows too steady, hoofbeats too well-timed. He said nothing, just adjusted the strap of his sword and waited. On the 4th night, they struck. Arrows flew out of the dark, fast and silent. 2 of his riders fell before they even saw who fired. Ned rolled behind a boulder, sword drawn, heart pounding. But it wasn't Lannisters, it was Frey's. Walder Frey had made his choice, and now Ned Stark had one of his own to make. Whether to retreat and survive, or stay and send a clearer message, no traitor walks away this time. The fire crackled in the center of the ruined inn as the bodies of 4 Frey men lay slumped in blood and mud outside. Ned Stark sat by the flame, his cloak torn, arm wrapped in cloth soaked with red. He hadn't fought like that in years, not since the Greyjoy Rebellion. But war had a way of digging up the wolf inside you, whether you welcomed it or not. Of the 50 he rode out with, only 30 remained. They buried their dead in silence beneath the inn's floorboards. No time for prayers. Ned took no joy in killing Walder Frey's men, but he no longer felt guilt either. Treachery had a cost. And if the Freys had chosen gold over honor, then they would pay in flesh. One of his younger riders, a boy barely 17, approached. "My lord, should we retreat? Maybe circle back toward Torrens Square," and Ned cut him off with a look. "We ride east, not one step backward." The boy nodded, swallowing his nerves. By morning they were gone again, smoke rising behind them. Ned had decided then and there, no more mercy. The South had no honor left. It was a game of liars and butchers, and if he wanted to change it, he'd have to start by bleeding it dry. The next 2 weeks were quiet but brutal. They struck camps in the night. Lannister supply wagons vanished. Commanders were found dead, in their tents with throats slit and wolf sigils pinned to their chests. A message. By the time word reached King's Landing, panic had settled deep in the Red Keep. Cersei doubled the guards on every gate. Pycelle suggested bribing northern houses to turn on Robb. Tyrion, ever the realist, started quietly packing bags for a possible escape. And Varys, he simply disappeared. But Joffrey flew into rages, screamed about traitors in the woods, and ordered more heads taken from the dungeons. Half of them were innocent. Didn't matter. His cruelty only grew, and so did the fear around him. In the shadows of the castle, Sansa received her second message. A scrap of parchment hidden in her stitching needles. "You will leave during the harvest feast. The fool will help. Wear grey." She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just folded it and went on sewing. The girl who had once dreamt of knights and songs had died in that tower. What was left of her was something colder, smarter, more dangerous. Meanwhile, Robb had led his army into the Westerlands. The bait worked. Tywin pulled troops from the capital to defend Lannisport, leaving King's Landing more vulnerable than ever. But Robb wasn't trying to win the Rock. He was trying to keep their eyes off the east, because Ned was coming, and this time, not with petitions and confessions. He rode toward King's Landing with fire behind him. Every village he passed gave him shelter, food, and silence. The small folk remembered the man who spoke of justice when others spoke only of power. They remembered the Warden of the North, who knelt not for glory, but to save his daughters. Now they watched him ride through their lands like a storm. He reached the Kingswood by the new moon, just 50 miles from the city gates. There he was met by the unlikeliest face, Brienne of Tarth. "I was told you'd come," she said, towering over his men, her sword slung across her back. "Lady Stark sent me, and so did someone else." "Who?" Brienne hesitated. "Tyrion Lannister." The men behind Ned stirred uneasily, but he didn't react. Not yet. "He says he owes you. Says you're the only man left who might stop the madness." Ned stared at her. "He's not wrong." Brienne nodded. "Then come. There's a secret path through the storm drains, into the Red Keep. It's guarded, but not well." "Why would he give us that?" "Because he knows the city is about to drown in blood." Ned looked toward the glowing haze in the sky, the breath of the capital, bloated with rot and secrets. "Then will be the tide." The storm drains beneath King's Landing stank of rot and centuries of filth, but the smell didn't bother Ned Stark. Not anymore. Not after the dungeons. Not after the betrayals. Not after months of riding through blood and fire to reach this place again, not as a prisoner, not as a lord, but as something colder. Justice. Brienne led them through tunnels carved by rats and forgotten by kings. Torchlight flickered off the damp stone, and every footstep echoed like a whisper of vengeance. Behind him, 20 of his most trusted men followed in silence, cloaked in grey, blades wrapped in cloth to muffle the ring of death. Above them, the harvest feast had begun. The Red Keep shimmered with candles and gold, laughter echoing through, halls built on lies. Lords and ladies drank sweet wine, while rats crawled beneath their feet. Joffrey sat atop the Iron Throne, smug and untouchable, unaware that the wolves had already entered the keep. Brienne stopped beneath a rusted grate. "This leads to the cellar beneath the Tower of the Hand. Quietest route. You'll have an hour before the guards notice." Ned stared up at the iron bars. The last time he walked these halls, he was in chains. This time he wore steel. They rose through the grate like ghosts from the past. In pairs, they split through the keep, guided by memory and shadows. No horns, no banners, just blades and silence. The first target was the Tower of the High, and Tyrion had left it empty, just as promised. The guards posted nearby had been paid to vanish. Ned stood in his old chambers for one long moment, breathing it in, and then he crossed the room, opened a hidden drawer beneath the hearth, and pulled out a letter sealed in wax. Jon Arryn's final message. The truth that had nearly killed him once. He tucked it inside his cloak. Then they moved again. The second target, Maester Pycelle. The old man was snoring in his chambers, surrounded by scrolls and sweet sleep. He woke to the sound of boots, eyes wide with terror. "No, no! I served the realm. I did what I was told." Ned didn't let him finish. Steel flashed. Pycelle's body slumped without ceremony, one less whisperer. The third target was the gate guards, a quiet skirmish. 2 dead, 1 fled. By now, the city had begun to murmur, whispers traveling faster than gold. The Ashen Brotherhood was inside the keep. Ned Stark was alive, and he'd come to collect debts. They reached the royal chambers just after midnight. Joffrey was asleep, alone. The throne room empty of courtiers, filled only with flickering shadows. Ned stood over the boy king's bed, watching his chest rise and fall. A child, a monster, both. "I should have done this the day Robert died," he muttered. "Do it now," one of his men whispered. "End it." But Ned didn't draw his blade. Instead, he took the letter from his cloak and placed it on the pillow beside Joffrey's head, then turned and walked out. He wasn't here to murder a boy. He was here to kill the lie. They moved to the throne room. By the time they arrived, Varys was already there, waiting, calm, as if he had always known how this would end. "You've come far," the spider said, voice low. "Too far to stop now." Varys nodded slowly. "You'll have half the city with you by dawn. The other half will panic. There will be blood." "There already is." Varys opened his hands. "Then go, speak your truth, but be ready for what follows. Truth doesn't rule in King's Landing. Power does." Ned walked past him without another word. He stepped into the throne room. The Iron Throne loomed like a beast of swords, and in front of it nobles and guards had begun to gather, summoned by fear and whispers. And then he spoke. He told them everything about Robert's children, not his, about Cersei and Jaime, about Jon Arryn's death, about the lies the crown was built on. He read Jon Arryn's letter aloud. He laid it bare. Some gasped, some shouted, some fled, but the ones who stayed, they remembered, not the lies, but Ned Stark. Guards lowered their blades, lords exchanged glances. Chaos boiled, but not with panic, with truth, with rebellion. Joffrey came stumbling in, flanked by terrified guards, shouting orders. But no one moved. Ned turned to face him. "Your reign ends tonight." The boy's face turned red with rage. "Treason!" "No," Ned said, stepping forward. "Justice." He didn't kill him. He let the city decide. By morning, Joffrey was gone. No one saw him leave. Some said he was dragged from his chambers screaming. Others whispered he fled dressed as a servant. Either way, the crown was empty. And Ned Stark, he didn't take the throne. He burned it. Before the gods would, before the people, he set the Iron Throne alight. The screams of steel echoed for hours, twisting into smoke and sky. "Let no man rule by fear," he said, "not any more." And when the flames finally died, the wolves began to rebuild.